Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. This is a weekly news program where we come on to your radio dial and tell y'all what is really going on here in Kalamazoo, the state of Michigan, the so-called United States, and the rest of the world from a working class perspective, largely, calling out, mainstream capitalist media on its BS, as well as interviewing local community organizers and talking about what's going on here in town. So we do have a very important show for you today coming on at about 1 p.m. We're going to have Steve Walsh from the Vine Neighborhood Association talking about Kalamazoo Public Schools and their potential or probable relocation of El Sol Elementary School to the East Side neighborhood and potentially replacing it with a parking lot. Oh man. Ugh. Pave paradise and put up a parking lot. I think there's a song about that. Um, I'll also be joined by my co-host to talk about all of the news that is fit to talk about. Apologies, we were gone last week. It was last week was kind of rough. Over the weekend was my mother's celebration of life, so my entire family had a lot to get together and get ready for a short amount of time. Of course, I did definitely want to come back today because this is going to be our last show before winter break. We do take winter break off, but we will be back in January, and we should be publishing our holiday special sometime in early January. Looks like I'm about to be joined by my co-host here. Wait just a second. Lawrence, how you doing today?
Yo, what up?
Yeah, all right. Well, we're live right now. I was just apologize because we were gone last week, had a lot going on. News
Yeah,
never
I was
sleeps, but
yeah, I was in Lansing lobbying. So shout out to End Gun Violence Now. Shout out to the multiple organizations that was with me in Lansing trying to get some comprehensive gun legislation passed and also some funding towards uh outreach workers like myself who deal with the aftermath of gun violence in their communities, not just here in Kalamazoo, but also in Detroit, in the Ben Harbor area, and in others. There's a lot of good work being done by people who are qualified but not compensated well. So yeah, I just want to get that. I just want to get that quick plug and that quick shout out before we get started.
I actually have one myself. And by the way, thank you for doing that good work. Um, I know I've been working with some colleagues with We the People Michigan. They've kind of
Yeah,
successfully ushered some important housing bills out of committee. We're looking at maybe eviction expungement and some fair chance housing bills getting
yeah,
onto the floor and going to a vote. So,
yeah,
yeah.
man. We out here doing the Lord's work, man. It's not just speaking into the ether, but actually putting some boots on the ground and organizing people.
Mhm.
It was a humbling experience going to the Capitol, but it also reinforces why I believe lobbying should be illegal, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah, and just to cap one thing off, I know we're all kind of tired in our holiday season. Maybe we're still a little like still got some itis from Thanksgiving or whatever. But try to this period that we're so Lawrence, me and I was up with We the People Michigan a couple weeks ago. Reason there's so much of an activist grassroots focus on Lansing right now is because the Democrats have just a couple weeks left before the session ends, and it's the majority goes to Republicans. So they basically
Yeah,
have this lame duck session where they can pass some legislation. So basically, like
yeah,
this coalition of groups are just trying to push the Democrats to push anything and everything they can. One of our favorite chants when we were up there was like, prove to the people you're not useless. So um, we're hoping to see a little bit more out of them than usual now that again It's basically going to be their last chance for this cycle to prove that they can do something for the average voter. And after the decimation that happened in November, you'd think they have kind of an incentive to do that. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The just a yes to add to that. It's it's crazy to think that it goes back to the thing that we always talk about on the show. Politicians only move when it comes to pressure or paper. And if you ain't got a lot of paper, then you need to mobilize a lot of people so that they feel pressure to move. Because they feel like if they don't do the legislation that the people are asking for, that they will lose their seat, then they will move with urgency. Otherwise, they will move. It's just they're moving to the green.
That's
Like,
right.
like, like, so brief spill. We're up to, like, I'm up there, and this is my first time actually lobbying because I've been to the Capitol before, but this is my first time lobbying up there. You have these politicians sitting in multiple meetings with multiple different groups all over the state on various different topics. If if you think about it logically, these same politicians that we're asking to do their job and to do something for the people that the American people want, they're taking all of that time plus begging for money from rich donors. So who will you listen to if a group comes up to you? Are you going to listen to the group that's bringing 10,000 people that's flooding? Are you going to bring the group? Are you going to listen to the group that only has like four or five people with them, right? That's talking about an issue, but you might be able to kick it down the road. Or are you going to listen to the one person who's coming who has $1 million check for you?
Maybe taking you out to do a nice lunch or something like that
Right.
too.
Right. So like that's the nature of the legalized bribery that we have in that we have in the system. And it was on full display when I went up there and I was just like, whoo. I was like, whoo. I
Hmm.
might end up. I was like, I might end up being a Marxist after this because I was like, Jesus. No, well, no, no,
Well,
but
we will welcome you with open arms. There's this,
no,
but
I'm still, yeah, I'm still a Democratic socialist. But I was just like, ooh, I can see why. I can see why you can get cynical, and I can see why um, you can get blackpilled. But at the same time, this fight isn't meant to be easy. It's meant for us to be able to plant seeds and bear fruit that we may or may not see. But those seeds still need to be planted because we need change. So yeah,
oh
that's my
yeah,
spill.
oh yeah, no, 100%. And okay, I guess with that, that's a good way to kind of get the program going. There's a few stories that we should definitely talk about here, and I guess again, you have a little bit more limited time, so I just kind of want to prioritize what you want to talk about first. I know there are also some criminal justice issues from last week we didn't get to, and as well as there's a lot of big news going on now. So, um, so I
Okay,
guess.
do you want to start jokingly or do you want to start sad jokingly? Because there's a couple different stories that I want to talk about.
Let's lighten it up first, and then we can get a bit
Okay.
more serious.
Okay, so lighten it up. I don't know if y'all seen um Kendrick Lamar. Like we're hip hop heads, right? We're hip hop heads. And a lot the reason why we named Media Cyphers and we named our show this is because it's because we're hip hop heads, right?
Hmm.
So I'm only bringing this up because it's a laughing matter that shouldn't be a laughing matter. Like it's not a laughing matter. It was a joke that shouldn't happen. So Kendrick said on his new album, "Don't let white comedians talk about black women. That's law," right? And a number of white comedians that do that shtick responded. Gary Owens, I give a pass. He was married to a black woman. He says jokes that talks about black community, but he's not belittling black people, right? Andrew Schultz, on the other hand, who also responded on his podcast Flagrant with other, melanated people on the pod, and he said something. He said that if him and Kendrick was alone in a cell, that he would have his way with Kendrick, and the only thing that Kendrick could do is either consent or not. Like, and that was the essence of the joke, right?
Mhm.
Now, outside of the fact that some of the other things that him and some of his other co-hosts were saying, which were very Bill O'Reilly-esque, like how could a hip hop person tell a comedian uh to speak better on black people, and that type of hypocrisy burn and that type of thing. I was like, you know what? I don't agree with it, but that's a valid argument that you can make. You can even make a valid argument about Kendrick with some of the people that he's associated himself with, other artists that have harmed women. You know what?
Mhm.
Valid argument. I don't agree with it, but it's a valid argument, depending on the circumstances, right? Saying that you saying that because you're taller than Kendrick and that if you and him was alone in a cell, that you would take his manhood. I'm like, Andrew, you're a comedian and that's the joke you went with, right? Like, come on, bro. Like I understand that he's cool with Charlamagne the God and they have their own Brilliant Idiots podcast, and that he also responded to some of the backlash he got because he got a lot of threatening messages. Obviously so, because people are not happy with you going after the most popular black artist of our time right now, but also the joke that you made. Like, sexual assault is not funny. It's not
Yeah.
funny in any way, shape, or form. And I'm saying that knowing that I'm a hypocrite. Because I remember when I was younger watching Mike Tyson basically say the same thing about like he said something similar to a boxer, that he was going to fight later. They like the month later they gave each other brain damage in a ring for entertainment. So I'm like, unless you are actually about to squabble up with K Dot or one of his representatives, you don't say this. Don't say this. Don't joke like this. For the young men who are watching, don't do that. Don't be Andrew. If you want to crack some other jokes about him being small, you want to crack some other jokes saying that he's not relevant. You want to crack jokes saying that he's ugly. You want to crack jokes saying that you could take his girl. You know what? All that's relevant. All that's hip hop. You know what I'm saying? Whatever. Saying that you gon' saying that part, not okay. Not okay
It's
at all.
crass, very grade school, and also just very strange. It's weird. It's just like
No, no,
yeah.
look, I like shock comedy. Like, look,
Mhm.
I understand that people don't understand sarcasm and shock comedy. I grew up on Dave Chappelle. I grew up on we grew up on Def Comedy Jam and Comic View, on Lisa Lampanelli and other people who were outrageous when they were saying outlandish crazy stuff. That right there though, that there's a line, you crossed it. You stepped over it. like like don't you pass go, you don't pass go, don't collect $200. Like that one's wrong. Right?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, so that's my quick hit. But man, I have to say, the story that's been lighting up my timeline, the assassin that killed the United Healthcare worker.
Hmm.
I mean, you are United Healthcare CEO. That's the story that's been blowing up my timeline because they finally caught the guy.
So Luigi's Mansion, right? Or no,
Yeah, yeah,
no,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I
No,
don't know
no,
who. I don't know.
no.
Yeah. So here's the thing. The thing that has been blowing up my timeline, or the things that I've been seeing, is that a lot of right wingers have now realized that they're actually aggressive leftists, because all of the
Yeah.
comment, because Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, all the right wing people that you would think to come out and basically say, "Oh my God, this CEO was killed, and it's so sad." All of their fans, all of the right wingers are like, hey, my thoughts and prayers need prior authorization, and and
Yeah.
because and because of my pre-existing condition to not care about CEOs, this will
Yeah,
not
yeah.
go through. It's been
I
denied.
the Ben Shapiro stuff was really telling because I think definitely like we want to break down kind of some of the
Yeah.
reaction stuff to this piece or piece of news, but like Ben Shapiro's audience called him on his BS because he did put up a couple videos framing this as like, oh, look at how violent the left is. Look at them celebrating the death of this man, blah blah blah. And like his own viewers just comment after comment after comment. It's like, no, this is you're lying. Everybody's celebrating, left, right, center. Everybody is glad this happened. Again, you're lying. You're just trying to pit people against each
No, no.
other.
Let's no, but let's be clear. We don't advocate violence. No one's advocating violence. And no one's advocating for the assassination of people. But everybody collectively is doing the old Chris Rock bit. Like,
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, but I understand.
I had to say, like, I turned to my wife after this happens. Like, I don't think I have not seen America this united since they got Osama bin Laden. Like, literally, that's
like,
the
dude,
last time
like,
I can remember everybody just in
okay.
this country being on the same page.
So I want to give people some facts, because they're probably wondering, like, why is the collective consciousness of our society basically siding with the dude that they're calling a modern day Robin Hood. They're calling him Robin Hood, and I don't agree with that. That's not okay.
Yeah, I got
But
some breakdown to give of that too. But yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting to
So
talk about the
so
reaction.
here's the thing. United Insurance, that group, denies 1/3 of their claims. 1/3. It said it's between 30 and 35% of the claims that they get. They are the highest in the industry of denying coverage. These are the same corporations that, again, they get paid because of the Affordable Care Act, because the Affordable Care Act forces Americans to buy from private insurers like them, right? They are giving government subsidies for every person that pays for them and pays for their insurance, but they also get paid when they deny you coverage, which means you have to pay out of pocket for medicine, for hospital visits, and things of that nature. They're getting paid two ways: you coming in and you going out, right? So, and also that same CEO bragged about how United Healthcare created an AI software to deny claims faster. That had a 90%. It had a 90% denial rate, and
Not 19,
independent
90, 90, just
90
so
90,
everybody knows. Yeah.
and independent investigators found out that AI was uh, wrong the overwhelming majority of the time. I think it was like 80 to 90%. So even though that AI is denying claims at a high clip, the majority of the claims, overwhelming majority of the claims that they are denying, are wrong. They should be covered. So, and if forgive me if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a Marxist philosopher, or it was a philosopher that talked about social harm or social killing or things of that nature. I
Yeah.
think it's Els, and he
Oh, it
talked
was,
about
yep, Angles. Yep, that's right.
Engels. Yeah, Engels talked about this, the condition of the proletariat being put in such a bad position that that the denial of care, the violence from the state, basically being denied coverage, getting sick, not getting help, being denied resources. This is an inevitability to them being harmed and killed, families being harmed either
Yep.
financially or being
Called
killed.
like social murder is the kind of
Yeah,
way to
yeah.
sum it up.
So that CEO and the other CEOs in this country that has to deal with healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Priority, hey, Priority, me and you need to talk too, because you did a very similar thing to me earlier this year that almost killed me.
I was
So
actually wondering if you might want to expound on that because it's a good example of kind of what I mean. I mean, just what
it's
we all go through that could,
yeah,
cause such
okay.
not only rage but affinity with this shooter and stuff. But
So yeah,
not to
so
derail you,
yeah,
but
no. So a lot of us sympathize and empathize because if you look at the comment section, go under any video, go under CNN, MSNBC, go under the Daily Wire, look at any of the videos, you will see Americans, grandmothers, your aunties, your uncles, all people who probably voted for Trump have horror stories. They have horror stories because the healthcare industry has tried to kill them. So since you brought it up, I'll speak on it. So I work for a wonderful nonprofit. Shout out to Griffin Place. I love them. I love them very much. They are a fantastic nonprofit. Um, the insurance from Griffin Place did not kick in until the beginning of October, right? So I had the state the I had to buy my medicine from the public market, just like everybody does every year, right? And I have priority health. Priority in September decided not to cover my main inhaler. I have chronic asthma. I've had chronic asthma all my life. So my main inhaler, for some reason, for the month of September, did not get covered by Priority Health. So I went like 2 weeks without my main medicine because I ended up running out and I couldn't buy it. Now, some of y'all are probably wondering, hey, if you could, you just have to buy it out of pocket, right? So my medicine went from $15 to $971.81. So to say, hey man, you could just buy a medicine, take out a loan or something. Nah, I couldn't. I just couldn't. I went 2 weeks without my medicine. I ended up getting rushed to the hospital uh the second week that Saturday. Shout out to two of my friends who were with me. They helped me out. They helped make sure I got there safely. And yeah, I had to get a breathing treatment. I had to keep calling them, keep calling priority, and they kept saying I need prior authorization before they can clear my medicine or cover my medicine again. But by that time, the company I'm working for, insurance kicked in. So now I'm on Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm no longer with priority. But yeah, I could have lost my life because priority health now denied my coverage, and I didn't have the money to drop down $1,000 from some medicine. Now, case in point, that same medicine, my Symbicort, in uh Canada costs $20, $20 to $30. If I had $971, I could have driven to Canada, bought a 3 month supply, stayed in a hotel, ate at the same restaurant that Kendrick and Drake was talking about in their music video, and then came back. Like, yeah, priority. So when I see that the shooter, going tying it back to the story, when I see that the shooter had engraved delay, defend, the book series that talks about how insurance companies deny claims and how to fight back, right? Or and they have those similar sentiments. Again, I don't condone violence, but I understand.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, very kind of pitch black humor, but I mean, it is very American to decide, like, oh, we've got a healthcare problem. Have we tried shooting at it yet? But no, I did want to talk a little bit about kind of so. Of course, there's always this interjection of like, oh, is violence okay? Is it not okay? And I think like well, maybe the more important thing to talk about is, whether or not it's okay. Because again, a lot of people are not crying tears for this individual because, again, very much guilty of social murder, as we just talked about. But I think it is important to note that, like, this is not going to bring about long-term change in any. real way. Now, I mean, we did see that it looks like some factions of the ruling class are a little bit spooked by this, which they if you you know some companies have reportedly kind of reduced how many denials they've been doing, but my guess
Blue
that
Cross
is
Blue
going.
Shield. Oh, Blue Cross Blue Shield absolutely pivoted on a policy that they had. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did. I
I'm
did.
sorry. I'm sorry
So
to
like,
interrupt.
yeah, I don't want to like dismiss that. That is a real, very real thing that just happened. And
So for those who do not know, in New York City and in a number of surrounding states, Blue Cross Blue Shield was decided that if your surgery is taking too long and you need anesthesia and you need to be put under, that they're not going to cover you after a certain point, right? So you need surgery. You need to be put under. You need to go under to have the surgery. They said, "Hey, you need more anesthesia. We're not going to cover it after 2 hours, right?" And then after the CEO got pew pewed, right? They were like, "Hey, we were joking about that policy. We were going to roll it out, but we're rolling it back now. We got y'all."
yeah, yeah, and I mean,
And,
there's something to be said. Like if if this whole situation makes the ruling class honestly about as nervous as the average person does at a school or a mall or like anywhere worrying about like a mass shooting, then maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing.
oh,
But
also,
yeah,
you pearl clutching children who's talking about, oh my God, I can't believe people are celebrating vigilantes. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
yeah,
Batman and Spider-Man are some of the world's most famous superheroes in America, and they're vigilantes. The right wing celebrated Kyle Rittenhouse because he was a vigilante. The
yeah,
dude,
exactly.
the dude that choked out a street performer on the New York subway station when he was having a mental health issue. They just ruled that the major crime that he was committed with, they're not prosecuting him for. But the right wing made him a celebrity, or they celebrated him when he choked out a street performer, someone who was performing to make money and to make a living. And because he did not recognize that person was having a mental health issue and got scared, he killed them. So I
I mean, the
for
list goes on.
all
I thought of that dorky white couple who brandished weapons to a Black Lives Matter march that was going in front of their
dog
house.
uh
They invited them to
Kyle
speak at the
Zim
Republican National Convention. You know, that's just,
Zimmerman, the right wing made him a celebrity. He sold the gun that he used to kill Trayvon Martin. So no, we're not doing that. No, I I do not celebrate vigilantes because most of the time what we see vigilante justice is usually done to the proletariat, to working class people, to poor disenfranchised people, for people who cannot fight back. That's usually where the violence of vigilante justice is pointed to. We have a rare moment where the someone did do vigilante violence, but they did it to someone else, to someone in the upper class of society that has literally literally has blood on their hands because of the nature of their work and what they do for a living.
yeah, absolutely. And something that I've been kind of going back to though is, I really want to talk on this program too about like, okay, what are the actual like solutions? And I think there's something very telling about the way the shooter must have felt some sort of catharsis, and frankly, most Americans apparently feeling a great degree of catharsis about this act of vigilantism. But let's get real for a moment. Like, what really happened? We scared a few healthcare executives into reining in their most evil impulses for maybe a while. Um, my guess is temporary. But I think it's very telling that so when I don't in this thing, I don't even remember now his name, like Brian something. Right after Brian got murdered, the other executives over at United Health went ahead and just had the meeting without him. So I want you all to understand that that tells us a couple things. One, these people don't even care about their own. I mean, to put it frankly, they are
That those
adherents.
people are psycho. That those people are
Yeah.
psycho. That's
And
what those.
they've been made so because the system that we're under, it's again, it goes back to the system. The system is capitalism, and the problem is you can go be the people's punisher or whatever, but there's just going to be somebody to replace Brian. There's just going to be some other company that's going to do that stuff. You cannot shoot your way out of a capitalist system. Now, with the
No, it
caveat,
reminds
maybe
me.
there's a
I'm
mass
sorry.
revolution, but we ain't anywhere near that. Don't you're kidding yourself if you think we are. Um, but really think about where we are, especially, something that I've thought about. There's a lot of like hay made of like, oh, is the shooter a leftist? Is the shooter not a leftist? Is the center? And we're kind of finding out a little bit more, some stuff from the alleged manifesto. I mean, some of it kind of reminds me a little bit of like libertarianism. He uses like, needs
He followed
language.
Elon Musk and other right wingers. So
Yeah,
just
which
like the right wingers that tried to assassinate Donald Trump, they are
mhm.
other right wingers.
Yeah,
It's
but I think it's important to underscore if you read some of what this kid wrote, it's very stoked in the language of class consciousness. And it goes back to this old quote, I can't remember who said it, but like somebody's like, if you torched every socialist and Marxist book on the planet, completely erased it from everyone's living memory, people would have to invent it because they would need a language, they would need some way uh to fight back against the oppressive capitalist class. And I think that's kind of what we're starting to see is again, a lot of people who would, if you ask them on the street, oh, I hate socialists, I hate socialism, Karl Marx was evil or whatever, they will give you the most again, socialist position on healthcare. And that's something that I think we've kind of gotten away from in some of these years about again, like there has been a degree of fragmentation. You think back to 10 years ago, it was all about the 99%. And while the ruling class has done most of the work dividing us, we've also divided ourselves. And, a lot of that is about, I challenge everybody who's listening. Christmas is coming up, and you're probably going to have some relatives, but, a lot of y'all are going to have relatives who voted for Donald Trump. Ask them how they feel about this vigilante act. Ask
oh,
them how they feel about health insurance. Because another thing we talked about on the show is if strip down a lot of the partisan language, if you just show people the policies of socialism, they are popular across the board. Everybody just instinctually wants that stuff. It's just, again, there is a very large propaganda media machine that works overtime to make people think that stuff is bad or to fight with one another, etc. But
you also need somebody to communicate those things well. Shout out to
that's
Tim
true.
Walsh, shout out to Bernie, shout out to ALC and others who actually do communicate those things well.
Hmm.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do want to say I saw one of the comments and I wanted to put this in because I know that we don't have a lot of time and we have to get to another story. But one of the comments that I saw because I you brought it up, uh, one of the comments was basically like, "Hey, if we had universal health care, I bet he would be alive." And when I saw that, I was like, "Wow, whoa,
Yeah.
that is dark." But I
No,
kind
I
of
mean it's
agree.
true. I mean, if we had universal health care, he wouldn't have gotten targeted in the first place. He'd be doing something else. Who knows? Maybe he'd actually be a farmer.
Man,
There's a story about him being, oh, he was a farmer when he
man.
grew up. It's,
Man, I
uh,
don't want to say like excuse me. The fact that like the reason why I'm saying that because I'm reading some of these comments, I'm looking at some of the comments right now, and I'm like, everybody's sharing horror stories. Uh, my husband, one of the comments, my husband had a heart attack. We sat in the emergency room, and United denied our insurance. The man's having a heart attack, and in his moment of need, that same insurance company is saying, "Nah, dog, you good? Walk it off.
No,
Pay for it
absolutely.
yourself."
So I just one little last point on the story before we move on, and I do want to wrap. So what again, the real solution is you know take this energy that we have around this topic, have some complex conversations with people who maybe you're not necessarily on the side of everything with. This is an opening. This is a moment. This is a really important moment to kind of foster. You talked earlier in this show about planting seeds, really trying to develop some class consciousness that just seemed to kind of happen organically after this event happened. And that can be leveraged into something that really could change things. And some things that come to mind, like again, I push stuff like boycotts and strikes a lot, and it's because they really do get the goods. Imagine if we leverage this energy into a national medical debt strike. Imagine if we just refused to give
Mm,
these companies money.
mm,
We could bring them to their knees faster than again just faster, more efficiently, and with much less danger than going out and being the Punisher or whatnot.
mm. Yeah. All right. So there are a couple other stories that we do need to talk about. Quick hit because I know that was a lot. Did you know that the Hawk Tuah girl has a Bitcoin now?
I've heard about this. I
Ah, dog, when
gotta
I
say,
saw
I've never seen somebody just leverage their 15 minutes of fame quite as effectively, but it's just
dog,
like
the
dragging
fact
those minutes out. But
when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, this is a scam. All Bitcoin is a scam." I'm happy. I'm like, "Oh my God." I knew it was a scam beforehand, but I was like, "Oh my God, what is going on?" Okay, so now we gotta talk about something serious. Um, uh, I think it was Amnesty International came out recently saying that what Israel is doing is a genocide. We've been talking about this for months now. With like ever since we've been talking about it ever since October 7th of last year. And now one of the biggest unbiased humanitarian organizations in the world is saying that what we are witnessing in 4K is a genocide. Now, that doesn't that doesn't bring the people who've been killed back. That doesn't free the hostages that Israel still have captured. That doesn't justify what Hamas did on October 7th. But that also does not justify the response and what Israel is doing and will continue to do after our next president lets them annex the West Bank and continue to steal land that's not theirs. So I'm just happy that we have an unbiased, well known, well respected institutes in the world that is now saying what we've all been saying. And now we, as the American people, need to take that to those who represent us and say, you're disagreeing with them, and they're usually the authority on such matters. They understand the best because they've covered every other genocide in the world. You can't deny what's going on now. So we need to you take this and be like, no, we need to fight back. We need to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. We do not need to be buying any more Israel products. We need to use that as a way to get change.
yeah, absolutely. And again, you're talking about so it came down from Amnesty International, which just to
Yeah.
emphasize to my listeners like how important, like this is a very middle of the road, really kind of associated with kind of a more kind of centrist constellation of NGOs. Um, this is again like you have almost like every reputable outlet besides the United States. And I mean, not that they're an outlet; they're an organization, human rights organization, calling calling it what it is. And what's particularly interesting is early on, if we go back to about a year ago, there were a lot of human rights organizations that were very cautious about calling it a genocide because there's a very specific legal definition of it. And Amnesty International in this report really did their due diligence, being like, no, this is how it fits every rubric of the standard for genocide as laid out in like the Geneva Convention. And I think one of the most startling things to me is just again the Israeli government just brazenly denying against its own testimony. Like again, the real kind of silver bullet, I don't want to call it that. Or, how's the metaphor go? Well, anyway, but the real crux to all of this is again they use a lot of the Israeli government's own words. They talk about they cite like Israeli officials calling Palestinians human animals, and IDF soldiers like live streaming their genocidal acts on camera on social media on TikTok and stuff. So this isn't even just like conjecture. Like we have the receipts. They have stacks of receipts. And the brazenness of the Biden administration to continue denying what it is, to say, oh, it's not. We disagree with Amnesty International, which again, you go back just a couple years ago when they were saying the same thing about like what's going on in or it wasn't them, but it was a different organization calling out what was happening in Ukraine, the ICJ. The U.S. government was all about, yay, ICJ, yeah, 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 yeah. But when the ICJ says the same thing about Israel, it's like, oh, it's they've lost their integrity, whatever. We're going to sanction them. Some crazy congressperson talked about like targeting them militarily. Um, but again, it just shows you the shallowness of principles in American politics because the only difference between like the big difference between like what's been going on in Ukraine and what's been going on in Palestine is like one of those is in within US interests, the other to acknowledge, the other is not. It is not within material interest to acknowledge the genocide in Gaza. So they are going to continue to deny. And let's see, who knows? Maybe the big change with the Trump administration, maybe they'll just say, yeah, it's a genocide and it's a good thing and we support it. I wouldn't put it past them. But yeah, again, just anybody who had any delusions about the moral integrity of either political party in the United States or its current leadership, I really hope this has disabused you of that notion. Um, and while we've come a long way as far as public support for the rights of Palestinians in just these last couple of years, we got a long way to go, especially in actually making our elected officials feel it.
Absolutely. I don't have nothing much to add. Also, I have to run back to work. But peace,
All
blessings.
right.
Everybody
Th-
have a happy holiday.
All right. Thanks for
Um,
dropping in, Lawrence. We'll see you in the holiday special. Enjoy your holidays, man. All right. I think with that, we're going to take a quick little break. We come back. I got a couple other stories to talk about. And then at 1 o'clock, we're going to be joined by Steve Walsh from the Vine Neighborhood Association to talk about Kalamazoo Public Schools and their plans to relocate El Sol Elementary. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution. Hello, everybody. We are back. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Just joining us, we just had a pretty robust conversation about, again, the that vigilante action out in New York, as well as some updates about the genocide in Gaza. Before we're joined by our guest at 1 o'clock, I wanted to touch on a story out of it's our friends to the east, Wolverines over in Ann Arbor. They're dealing with some stuff from the university that I thought was worth commenting on, especially kind of in the context of the oncoming Trump administration. So there's a headline from Bridge, Michigan. I'm going to read some bits from this, kind of give my take on it. Facing DEI scrutiny, University of Michigan abandons diversity statements in hiring. This is written by Isabel Lohman, published on December 5th. Amid a national debate over diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, or again, really parentheses, a lot of bigoted scaremongering from right wingers. The University of Michigan announced Thursday it would no longer solicit diversity statements as part of faculty hiring, promotion, and tenure. It's the first step in what could be a broader effort to scale back DEI at U of M, which has reportedly spent roughly $250 million on related initiatives since 2016 and has one of the largest programs of its kind in the country. President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to go after what he and other conservatives contend are overly liberal universities by using the accreditation system to impose real standards and remove, quote unquote, all Marxist diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucrats. So just wanted to touch a little bit on this framing here. There is a ocean of difference between Marxism and scare quotes the Marxism people like Donald Trump and right wingers refer to with these kind of scaremongering tactics. Um, Actually, there is a pretty strong Marxist critique of a lot of diversity and equity and inclusion programs, in that they are kind of this. They're based on this very liberal identity politics that is often divorced from the C word, which is class, without that important analysis of how racial capitalism has developed. Um, in the history of the United States, you're kind of left with half of the history that does not really give you the information you need to fight real systemic not impression, oppression. Um, and of course, that's a problem in itself. And of course, the university system likely would not teach something that dangerous. Now, granted, there are the occasional leftist and Marxist professors that operate in the United States. Richard Wolff comes to mind. I know a couple of folks here in the Kalamazoo area that would fit that bill. Um, but often they are kind of marginalized within academia. And there is this sort of thing. It's like, almost like the bourgeoisie, the ruling class needs to let a few people in, just kind of prove that we have, quote unquote, First Amendment free speech. This new era of kind of renewed McCarthyism, one could conjecture that even that is necessarily going to be removed. Um, and again, if you know people who fit that definition in academia, it's going to be really important for all of us to support them in the next few years, because it is very likely that the U.S. government is going to target those individuals and those educators a lot more overtly than they have been in previous years. And I guess that necessarily includes myself. I'm not an instructor, but I do I'm a Marxist who runs an avowedly leftist radio program out of the college station. So as we talked about in our election coverage special, that is something that could come home to roost for us as well. And it's important, though, even though that, again, there is a leftist Marxist critique of diversity, equity, inclusion programs. We got to keep in mind the far right uses DEI as a stand-in for any sort of leftist politics, left of center, that they want to go after and dismantle. And necessarily, this is something that should pique our attention and is kind of worth something worth defending. U of M students and faculty have launched new fights to retain DEI initiatives and argue the university should not bow to political pressure. More than 100 people marched from outside President Santa Ono's University homes, the administration building, on Thursday, chanting, "You can't hide, you know that we want DEI." Princess Jamara Maboob, speaker from the Black Student Union, went on to say, "We go to a university that has diversity, equity, and inclusion plastered on their websites all over the walls of buildings. They attach these things as their core values, and to double back now would be egregious." Provost Laura McCauley announced the U of M decision Thursday morning in the university record, which cited a faculty work group finding that using diversity statements in the hiring process could potentially limit freedom of expression and diversity of thought on campus. It again goes back to this whole right wing chestnut of like, oh, conservative voices are being oppressed or excluded. And um, again, as we talk about often on our show, everybody has the First Amendment, everybody has free speech, but speech has consequences. Unpopular speech definitely has consequences. And if a bunch of people show up to protest your events that you're speaking at, chances are you have some very unpopular speech. You know, Republicans always try to hide. They try to think. Again, they get it wrong. First Amendment protects your right to free speech. It does not protect you from consequences of that speech. And it feels very much like that's the vibe that the University of Michigan is trying to go with. That's certainly what the Trump administration is going to be imposing on academia, which again is to try to protect their conservative colleagues from the consequences of unpopular speech. One thing that did strike me is that some of the conservative critics of DEI slam the quote unquote bureaucracy, um, and the Republicans cited how much money it was over $250 million spent over the past 8 years, and to be fair, they do have a point. There is, again, a lot of money gets siphoned into these kind of more liberal think tanks that again, they spend a lot of their time tooling language that is, again, garnered to making universities more kind of on the surface inclusive without really doing anything to challenge oppressive systems. Again, it's really just trying to reunite everyone under the banner of rainbow capitalism. And like many other industries of the sort, the consultant class in Washington comes to mind. There's a lot of people who just basically do some profit seeking in that industry. So I mean, yeah, they're not wrong. There is some bloat. Of course, a lot of them are coming at it from bad faith, where their goal is not to make DEI better or less bloated. It's to strike it all together and pretend that racism doesn't exist. I think one of the letters that students sent, the letter that students sent, signed off by more than 2,500 faculty, staff, and students, probably puts it best. Supporting DEI does not mean that we cannot criticize some aspects of it, and it does not mean that DEI initiatives as they currently exist are perfect. However, we cannot deny the real material improvements that DEI programs have accomplished for so many who are part of the campus community. And honestly, that's true. It can make at least the environment a little bit better. And while they may not be talking about class consciousness and racial capitalism, it does at least make the environment a little bit more or less hostile towards those kinds of conversations. So again, if you want to read that article, that full article for yourself, and it's pretty thorough, it is over on Bridge, Michigan. Facing DEI scrutiny, University of Michigan abandons diversity statements in hiring. It's written by Isabel Lohman on December 5th. We're going to take a quick break and come back. We should be joined by a special guest to talk about the future of the Vine neighborhood and El Sol Elementary School. Keep your dial locked. This is Media Cyphers. You can find us online at widerfm.org. We also have the Media Cyphers podcast. You can find that at most podcasting apps, as well as you can find us on YouTube. Keep the dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your source for political revolution. Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. We're back and we are now joined by Steve Walsh of the Vine Neighborhood Association. He's joining us here today to discuss what is going on, what is up with El Sol Elementary School. And some of you may not heard, been really big news, particularly in the Vine neighborhood. KPS has announced plans to relocate it over to the east side. And there's been some hubbub about potentially bulldozing the building and turning it into a parking lot. So this again, there were some public meetings yesterday. There's a lot of intense back and forth. But before we get into all that, again, Steve, thank you for taking time to join us on the program today. And I was hoping if we could maybe just start, maybe for listeners who are unaware, talk a little bit more about El Sol Elementary, what it is and how it relates and is important to the Vine neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to be here. So, the dual language school, the immersion program began at 1999 at the Lincoln International Student School, but struggled for a number of reasons. And it was predominantly Lincoln was a neighborhood school as well, and half of the staff and students were involved in the immersion program, and the other half were not. And so there was a little bit of neighborhood conflict where a couple of two different kind of visions for what the school could be. And in 2008, the KPS kind of looked over here at El Sol, at what used to be, at that point, it was the Vine Street Elementary. And they looked at that as a potential site for this dual language immersion school. They moved in. There was some rehab, some work that needed to be done. The Vine Neighborhood Association, along with Vine Ventures, which was sort of the Vine Neighborhood Association fundraising arm at the time, we contributed a small amount. We contributed $50,000 to that as sort of a good faith effort. We were excited that the school was coming. We very much looked at it as a linchpin or a cornerstone of the neighborhood, and something with which we could build on. There's a very real and direct line from when the Vine Street Elementary School closed in the early 80s to sort of the exodus of families within the Vine neighborhood and the creation of a sort of a renter-centered neighborhood. So we've always been excited. We want to be attractive for quality property owners. We want to be attractive for renters. We want to be attractive for families. And this was going to be an opportunity for the neighborhood association to just have an amazing card. A neighborhood school is so fundamental to what goes on within a community. I think that obviously the education component is paramount, but there are so many other things that happen within that school and on that playground that help folks feel like that's woven into the fabric of the school. So the school opened in 2008. It had 150 students. There was a small percentage that were from Vine. Most of the students came from the Edison neighborhood, the epicenter of our vibrant Hispanic community. El Sol immediately became a very popular school. It has an incredible PTO. It had great leadership right out of the gate, and it was really a wonderful addition. Every year, enrollment would sort of go up a little, and every year, we were not partners, but we were interested bystanders. We would try to encourage the conversation of how can we continue to have Vine students enroll in the school, even though it was sort of a magnet school and everything but funding. For a number of us that had the opportunity to have our children go to El Sol, for me personally, it was sometimes dispiriting to walk past a dozen kids that were school age and that were getting on a school bus to go to be taken to Woods Lake, which would have been the elementary school for Vine students if they did not get into El Sol. And I felt like, even at that stage, I felt like if those families could have been incorporated into the neighborhood, it would have been an even tighter community. And it is such a privilege to be able to walk your kid to school. And it's such a unique opportunity to experience the neighborhood with other families and other people as they're walking their kids to school. And I really felt like that was a priceless card that we were able to play. We struggled to really develop a model that would incorporate more students within the Vine neighborhood, or more students from the Vine neighborhood. So one of the things that we hear is that it's not really, there's a small percentage of students that come from the Vine neighborhood, and I'll speak in greater detail about that later, but it's never really been set up as a neighborhood school. So in 2008, it opened. It's been a huge asset in the community for many years. There were many conversations about the size of that building, including the age, and it is a very old building. There's been buildings on that site since the late 19th century. There's been fires. There's been a whole host of issues to what happens to an urban school in this environment. The conversation always had a component of, we will stay here, we will build here. The new school may move a little bit north, it may end up moving a little bit east, more towards Old Central, but it will predominantly be here. And even I think in as late as 2022, there was verbiage, there was things coming out of KPS that said the new school, the millage that we're raising, or the millage that we're going to be asking for, will be to raise funds for a new school in the Vine neighborhood. So probably it was late November, we started to hear from folks who worked at the school that they had been told that quite likely El Sol was going to close, that there was a parcel of land on the east side of not the city of Kalamazoo, but the county of Kalamazoo, that was a very attractive parcel for El Sol, that they had outgrown this location. They had gone from their original 150 students to over 350 students. And then to build this school, to rebuild this school would mean that it would be a tremendous reduction in the square footage of playground. So that started to kind of come out through the Vine grapevine. And then there were further folks that we talked to that had been connected to Chenery, and they were hearing the same thing from Chenery. And folks at Chenery, from their perspective, what they're looking at is there's a real competition for the parking lot. They've had a lot more use in the parking lot. So from Kalamazoo School, from KPS's perspective, this was a win-win. They could move a school, they could create a new school, build a new school with all the amenities in the county of Kalamazoo, and that this would be a real boon for El Sol students. What they were surprised was that there was blowback, that the neighborhood felt that there had been a little bit of a bait and switch, well, not a little bit, but there had been a bait and switch in terms of verbiage and what we had been told. And that the real slap in the face would be that what we would be left with was a parking lot, because there was just the parking lot as it is overburdened, that they need more parking. So, there was a lot of conversation immediately about the proper use, or the proper response to an overburdened parking lot is not more parking, it's to try to figure out how to reduce that usage. So as the kind of word was disseminating throughout the community, there was a request from KPS, from Karen Jackson, to meet and talk about what was going on. And so it was not do not envy her for having to come over and have this conversation. I think, again, what was surprising for KPS is that there was some resistance towards the closing of the school. I think that what they were challenged with kind of finding out, and I think what they heard yesterday writ large, was that there isn't a parent in this neighborhood that is opposed to a bigger, better Vine, or bigger, better El Sol Elementary. And that if this new site over on the east side offers up all these amenities and is something that is attractive and makes a better environment for El Sol students, by all means, there's not a person in that room that was there yesterday for the 3 meetings who was opposed to a bigger, better El Sol. I think what the other component of the conversation that we wanted was, what are the obligations of KPS for a community? Is this an equity issue in that the Vine neighborhood is the only school now that doesn't have an elementary school? And, there's a bit of a lack of vision that to tear down this school to create more parking seems like a very 20th century solution to a 21st century problem, when ultimately the reality is Chenery doesn't have more. Chenery didn't add additional seating. Chenery still has the amount of seating that it's always had. Old Central has added a number of additional programming, adult ed, continued education. CAMSI has been there. I think CAMSI has the whole third floor, additional programming, and that's been great for the use of the building. From where I sit and from where the VNA sits, 95% of the use of Old Central, the people that are using that are driving. So I think if you were to take that, and they would drive anywhere. So there are other parcels that the city, that KPS owns. There's one on South Westnedge that I think used to be Kalamazoo Heritage. Folks that are using programs at Old Central will drive wherever those are. Whereas if you were to build a school to scale that would fit on that property, there's early forest childhood programming. It's state mandated that we're going to need school buildings for. Could CAMSI en masse move over and take that over? And could funding be used to help make that an elite building for CAMSI? Because the CAMSI students, they don't need a playground. That is not a component of moving that school, which is one of the things that KPS has said is one of the primary factors to why they need to move. So from where we sit, I think there's a lot of heartbreak and disappointment that this was just sort of announced a couple of weeks ago. There are a number of folks in this neighborhood who moved here primarily because they wanted to be able to walk their kids to a great school like that. There are a number of folks that have struggled with the fact that they couldn't get their kids into this school. So there was a hope that maybe if it wasn't El Sol, maybe you could come up with a school that would serve the Vine neighborhood. Because again, we're the only neighborhood now that does not have a school. In Vine, there's a very real feeling, a palatable feeling in Vine that excellence is not funded and that the prosperity is not shared in Vine, and that this is another example of a decision being made that looks good on paper, but really will have a dramatic and profound effect in a neighborhood that has struggles already, and as a core contiguous neighborhood in the city of Kalamazoo that doesn't get a lot of support from either the city or the philanthropic community. It's hard to feel like this decision helps Vine move forward in the right direction. So I know that's a lot. The school has been there for about 16 years. It continued to grow and become a great school. There's been a lot of change in administration and leadership, and as that's happened, there's been less connectivity to the neighborhood, which has been a challenge. But again, we're interested in invested partners, but that's not our bailiwick, and we're not trying to tell El Sol how to run El Sol. We want to help support it within the community. We were told in one of the meetings yesterday that speed is a factor. I think people in Vine drive by the school like that. Imagine how they're driving through the rest of the streets that don't have a school there. And I think speed throughout the city of Kalamazoo is pandemic. It's not related to Vine. There were some incidents. There was some talking about a time when the school was on shutdown because of some gun activity that happened. We know that the city of Kalamazoo struggles with gun violence. This is not unique to the Vine neighborhood. It's certainly, unfortunately, not unique to our public schools, which have been just brutalized by gun violence over the years. So again, my criticism of that would be that it's not a Vine neighborhood problem. And it doesn't remove us from it, but it means that this encapsulates so much more than if only we move 13 miles east. And I think there's just so many questions and so much desire to try to have a broader conversation about what that means. So at this point, I think there's really a hope that the school board pumps its brakes on Thursday, that there is no decision that's being made. There are a lot of folks that feel like this is not being handled. There are some trust issues now from residents in Vine, not necessarily feeling like KPS has been straightforward. Again, this is not like there's no animus towards any personal school board members. I think that they have the interest of their students first and foremost. I think this is a matter of information and sort of the players in the room and what is the vision for the Vine neighborhood, and what does it mean to the neighborhood to have its only school removed, its only public school removed and replaced with a parking lot?
Well, thank you. That was a pretty comprehensive answer and explanation. Well, no, I appreciate it. I do want to follow up just with a couple of observations. I think
Yes.
you're right on talking about again, the gun violence and the speeding that's been brought up. I grew up in the Edison myself. That especially in the '90s when I was growing up, there was a lot of concern about gun violence, but I never once heard about them saying like, well, we need to shut down or move the Washington Writers Academy.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could maybe comment or critique a little bit more about either like the lack of input or just it seems there's a lack of kind of they always talk about community stakeholders and getting
Right.
input, but from what I've seen regarding this particular case, they talk about moving El Sol to a nice parcel of land. As you mentioned earlier, the majority of Spanish speakers actually live in the Edison. So that,
Hmm.
there's a question if you were trying
Yes.
to get, put it somewhere closer where the students live.
Yes.
There's also, yeah, again, the question of, Vine is, maybe one of the most intensely walkable neighborhoods in the city, and the idea that you are busing most of those students to Woods Lake is also a little strange, and there hadn't been much forethought on that. So, if you could maybe just kind of stretch out a little bit or go deeper into that particular critique of where you think the ball was dropped in that communication between the Vine neighborhood and KPS.
Absolutely. Again, I want to stress that we did not necessarily expect to be invited into the room. We worked with the school board and we worked with the earlier original administration at El Sol, and that was a really great relationship. As the administration has changed and they're more focused on the day-to-day operations over there, I don't know that there was as much need or desire to have input or a relationship with Vine. Um, I think you speak to a broader subject in terms of like what is the overall goal for our students, and how is busing the best solution to some of these issues. And we there were some of us that spoke after the meeting yesterday and talked about what a missed opportunity it was to work with some of these other nonprofits to perhaps try to be more attractive to folks from the Hispanic community, whether not necessarily to poach folks from Edison, because that's a vibrant part of the community. But if there were more folks that were interested and they were they wanted to participate in the school and they were native Spanish speaking, could we not find ways, especially at this time in 2008, that's one of the more recent housing crises. So we have opportunities in Vine. There are folks that are moving out of Vine. There's also the creation of all sorts of additional student housing on West KL Avenue. So there is somewhat of the beginning of an exodus of students as they start to look at other places. What would have been nice, and I remember having this conversation at the time, was in that vacuum, how do we somehow become more attractive to abuela, abuelita, or tia, and say like, man, these houses that used to have 5 or 6 students in them are now these great houses for extended families of all types. And like, what could we do so that we reduce some of this footprint in terms of the need to bus? And I think some of it, Andy, is that folks that make these decisions, I don't know that they've actually ever had the opportunity or the privilege of walking their own kids to school. And it's such a unique component in an urban core neighborhood that I don't think they understand how attractive that is to folks to be able to do that. And that I think in Vine, people see things that they want to emulate, whether it's people performing down in the parks or art being put up. And I think there were parents that said, I want to do that. Like if we move into this neighborhood and it's affordable, I may have the opportunity to be a stay-at-home part-time parent, whatever, part-time worker, and I want the opportunity to walk our kids to school. But I think folks that make decisions for the city of Kalamazoo, they don't look at our neighborhoods like that. They don't have this, they don't walk the same streets that we walk. They don't walk at the same time. For some of these organizations, we're lucky if we get a like you're welcome at 5 o'clock as they leave the city. So I think sometimes it's just a real failure of vision. It's a failure to see something other than how exciting it would be to build a new building. So much progress is tied into new builds. We know we're doing great as a school system because we're making these new buildings. And I think, you and I know, and we've had this conversation, these buildings tend to be built. This building will be built in the county. The other buildings that are built are on the farthest ends of the city's boundaries. We sat in a room a couple of years ago and we were talking about the 17th anniversary of the promise. And the speaker said, I think we have to ask the question, 17 years in, is the promise working? And I thought, if we're asking the question 17 years in, we know the answer is not really. Like, that is such a massive card to be able to play. And we as a collective community have never figured out how to do it. In fact, we've catered and made it easier for folks to not be in the neighborhood. So it's dispiriting. It feels like a very real step back. It feels like Vine there's this feeling that the untethered hand of the free market will help Vine, and that's just simply not going to be what happens. I mean, from 2007 to where we are now, there are incremental steps every year to make this a neighborhood that was attractive to everybody. It's the most densely populated. As you mentioned, it's the neighborhood that walks probably the most. There's no clear way for us to even get downtown. I walk to the State Theater, I walk downtown, and I'm walking on fairly dark cedar streets. I'm walking in these areas that are really derelict in terms of resources being allocated to make sure that the neighborhoods are safe, or that we're doing the best that we can. I think one of the things that was really, really disappointing yesterday was the talk about how challenging the parking lot is, and how challenging Vine Street and Oak Street is for their students to navigate, and that student and parents will park pretty much anywhere to pick up their kids. Like go to Winchell when schools are letting out, and the entitlement there, bike lanes are filled with cars waiting to pick up their little sweethearts. So, I think to the idea that somehow this was unique to Vine, I think is just you're missing the fact that people would walk. They would walk to these things if this was supported, if there was a component, if there were more students from Vine that were able to walk. One of the things that I didn't mention was that you had to enroll into El Sol. If you were not if you did not come from a Spanish speaking household, you needed to enroll into El Sol as a kindergartner. If you did not make that enrollment, if you did not get into some of those reserved slots, your student wasn't going to El Sol. They weren't going to transfer in as a fourth grader, a third grader, anything. So when the conversation pivoted a couple of years ago about, well, there might be a new El Sol, but it might not be a dual language immersion school, I thought, and I had to be very, very careful about this, because even within my own household, there were lots of people that worked extremely hard. That was a very important component, was the dual language immersion. And I know that was attractive. There were folks that came from Mattawan, there were folks that came from other neighborhoods because they wanted that component. We had so little traction in terms of how do we get our students in there. So I wanted to make sure that we were honoring the folks that had worked hard to include the dual language immersion program. But there was a part of me that always wondered if it would have soared even more had it been allowed to be a neighborhood school, had it been encouraged to be a neighborhood school. I think there really wasn't much effort to increase home ownership in Vine. There really wasn't much effort to partner with other groups, other nonprofits, and to keep people in our houses. One of the things that we know is the best way to prevent homelessness is to absolutely keep people in their homes. And there are a lot of nonprofits in this city that receive a lot of money to serve the city of Kalamazoo and absolutely do not have a footprint in Vine. And I think, through my years and times here, what I have discovered and hold to be true, that is in the city of Kalamazoo, it's never a lack of funds. It's always a lack of vision. And I think if this city had an idea, if they wanted that school to succeed, it could have been a shining star. It could have been an attractive beacon that brought other folks in, possibly a model. It could be a Montessori school like there is in Northglade, which is extremely popular and has a waiting list. You go to like Parkwood Upjohn, and they have literally built that neighborhood around that school those norms are appreciated and supported. The norms in this neighborhood were not, and we know that there's a hierarchy in need in the neighborhoods, and our objective is not to try to cut other neighborhoods off, because I really truly believe that other neighborhoods, as they're successful, and the same for Vine, we help lift all the neighborhoods, and we never tried to promote Vine at the expense of any of our neighbors, because we're all in it together. Some folks are more in it together than others. So, I feel like these folks that are making these decisions aren't living in core neighborhoods. They don't understand that they might take these things for granted, that in wherever they live, it's just a given that people are going to walk their kids to school, or it's a given that they're going to drive their kids to school. And so it's sort of unfathomable that there might be a component of people that aren't beholden to the automobile at every step of the way.
Absolutely. And or sorry, absolutely. And I wanted to kind of pivot real quick to, of course, I think a big part of kind of the shock, this news dropped very fast. The timetable was very short.
Yes.
Um, and I know this is maybe a difficult question to grapple with, given like just how quickly this all unfolded. But what would have been some of the conversations like, as far as offering an alternate vision? Like, again,
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody's kind of shocked about, like, nobody wants paved paradise and put up a parking lot and whatnot.
Right.
But
Right.
um, you
Again,
know,
the last thing we wanted was El Sol Mom versus El Sol Mom. Like, that's not what this was about. Like, there's nothing but support for El Sol, and if it needs to leave the Vine neighborhood in order to flourish and grow, and really expand, then that's fantastic. But they've struggled to implement continued immersion schools at Maple, and they've struggled to hire and retain staff that can work in a dual language immersion school. So we wish them the best of luck. And if they're leaving, like, that's fine. We don't want a school that doesn't want to be here. The conversation then moves towards what is the best usage of this spot. And I think that would have been a great opportunity to bring in a number of different partners. There are so many developmental companies that would take a look at that. There are so many places that at one point there was a conversation like, well, if it became like affordable housing, that would soften the sting of it some. If it was like nice condominiums or apartments or something that retrofitted that building. It's a 100-year-old building. It's gorgeous. When it goes away, it's going to go away. I think of the Rose Building downtown, and it's one of the most beautiful structures that we have. And we built a parking structure literally right up as close to, it's so close that you can't possibly take a picture of this 100-year-old building and not have a brick parking structure next to it. And I just think, like, it's time to kind of change that mentality. It's time to think outside of, like, well, if there's too many cars, we need more parking. No, we need to reduce the amount of usage. There are a lot of places, quite frankly, the United Way across the street they could be anywhere. Their impact in Vine is virtually non-existent. And I can't speak to what they do in Kalamazoo because I have no relationship with the United Way. They could go anywhere, and that could become parking. It's already, and this is kind of egregious, it's already the VIP parking for Chenery events. So Chenery has to pay these folks at United Way to use their parking lot. That they could have worked out. Perhaps there's some conversation there. I think that what was the most bitter pill for Vine residents is this component that it's going to be a parking lot, and there's a feeling that KPS has been disingenuous in its kind of information, and the Superintendent Slade mentioned yesterday that was the 7th meeting. I think we can all use numbers to try to talk, like, in any manner that we want. It most certainly wasn't the 7th meeting that the Vine Neighborhood Association was aware of, or that Vine residents were aware of. There was a meeting with El Sol staff a couple of weeks ago. They were just as gobsmacked as everybody else. So, you can put out something that says less than 7% of the kids are from the neighborhood. 27% of the kids are actually from the Vine neighborhood. neighborhood. But what that doesn't address is sort of that elephant in the room. It's like, well, why weren't there more Vine neighborhood kids there? Why weren't more kids invited to be a part of this program? So I think, those are the conversations that would have been great to have. Could that be a Montessori school? So it's still something that's attractive for parents, and then the kids go someplace else. We struggle, Andy, for 6 years. We've had an ongoing conversation with the city of Kalamazoo about how to get middle school kids safely from Merrill Street to Maple Street across Howard, because right now it's a vicious, dangerous game of Frogger. It's been 6 years, and 23 speed bumps have gone up in Edison, numerous traffic islands. It's been impossible to go anywhere in the city and not have there be some disruption to traffic flow. And yet absolutely nothing has been done about the crossing on Howard for middle school kids. Go there when middle school lets out and watch those kids try to run across the street and hope that people don't hit them at 50 miles an hour. There's no advocacy for them other than what's happening out of this neighborhood. And it just hasn't gained traction. Like, there's a real palatable frustration that people are just as invested in this neighborhood as in other neighborhoods, but we're just we're not at the table. We're not included. Our views are discluded. And there's a wonderment in terms of like, what is it that we're supposed to do? Because we feel like we're doing a lot of the lion's share of working in Vine. But then there's these decisions like El Sol that get made, and it's just an absolute slap in the face for it to be a parking lot. And, Dr. Slade yesterday continually would say that these meetings were based on fact, and he was only giving fact. Well, there's facts that were here before Dr. Slade. He was really disrespectful to Vine parents yesterday, and that was a very real challenge. And the tone was very condescending, to the point that people said, we're not your students. Like, that's not this environment. And you may have to have parents. There may be some vitriol from parents because they do feel like there was a bait and switch. So your response can't be, the neighborhood failed us, the speed was too much, these things, this is why we're moving. You have an opportunity to build a brand new school, and you love that, and that's great. And when you leave, there's going to be a huge vacuum here. So what can you do that causes the least amount of harm? What is KPS's obligations? Do they have any obligations to the community they serve? These are all questions that I would love to have vetted on a larger level. I spoke to a city commissioner who actually was taken aback and was somewhat defensive. And they said, what is it that you want us to do? That's a KPS decision. We can't do anything. And I said, when these decisions are being discussed in the room, somebody needs to weigh in and advocate on the sides of the neighborhood and say, like, what is the plan for this? If you leave, so much of what drives this community is development and developers. And people get excited. Again, they get excited about new builds. That means progress to folks. And if they're not looking at what was left behind, then they're just simply, the gaze is at the new building. It's very disheartening for the folks that are here and have put in many, many years, 16, 15 years of trying to make this work under the auspice of, we're partners in this together. And then the partner says, no, actually we're not. We're partnering with the county. I just want to reiterate, this new school building will not be within the city limits. It will be in the county. And it's a failure of vision, and it's a failure of leadership. And I feel like it goes across the board and includes a magnitude of people, including the neighborhood association. I should have been advocating more to be at the table, but we were trying to be respectful of the process, and we were going on the information that we had. Again, as late as 2022, paperwork was coming out from KPS saying that the new millage would be going towards building a new school in Vine. So there's a feeling of that was not that was not being particularly honest. What KPS will tell you is that this was a new decision to them, that they were operating under the premise that they were going to build, and that they did all their due diligence. And then all of a sudden, when they looked at it, it was going to be a reduction in playground. They weren't going to have a track like they could have. Winchell is the only school in Kalamazoo that has a track. But this is something for El Sol, prospective El Sol parents to be excited about. So, I think there's a feeling of like, there were a lot of folks in that room that did a lot of advocating and a lot of campaigning so that the millage would pass. So then to have it pass and we get a thank you, I guess basically, is really, there's a lot of hurt feelings and there's a lot of animus. And I have spoken to Karen Jackson when she came and talked to me, and I spoke to her yesterday, and I said there's no animus here between us. So, but my job is not to carry the water for KPS. My job is to advocate for Vine residents, and I also have another hat on in that. I was a parent. I've had two kids go to El Sol. So the women that were in the room at the meeting yesterday, I know firsthand the blood, sweat, and tears. And I recognize the tears and emotions that they put in because I was there. I was there for much of what they were doing. And I know how much effort they put in and how hard they worked. So to have this taken away is really just a gut punch. And my hope is that on Thursday night, KPS, the board president, Tiana Harrison, who I have a lot of respect for and who I've had good conversations with, I hope they just press pause and they say, like, I think go ahead and vote for the new school, the new El Sol, be excited about that. But I think the other part of that component is, what can we do to do right by one of Kalamazoo's core contiguous neighborhoods? We're educational desert. Other neighborhoods have childcare, they have peeps. We do not have any of that, So I guess, the question on the table is, what can you do to sort of do right by us? And the other question that other folks are having is like, is there a desire for the Vine neighborhood to do well? Is that even a goal of the community? Or is it really like, it's just going to become a permanent rental neighborhood and hopefully a high quality rental neighborhood, but it's going to make no attempt to be anything other than that. And I think that's a really short-sighted vision. That would be disappointing if that was the vision for any of the core neighborhoods. I think all of the neighborhoods have really, all the neighborhoods currently have amazing leadership with new visions who I think are going to do some radically profound things to really open the doors of those institutions and continue to build on what their predecessors had. And like, I'm excited for Edison. I think, this corridor of the Vine Street between Edison and Vine, you've got this amazing institution there, Bronson Hospital, that we could be working on. Like, that's a whole area that could be built up that would bridge that gap to El Sol. And maybe those folks then walk to what used to be El Sol. They're just, I would just like to see some thinking outside of the box, other than we're going to tear it down and we're going to put up a parking lot. And, again, if the thumb on the scale is the Gilmore Foundation and the Gilmore Keyboard Festival, then the answer to that is to remove programming from Old Central, where people are driving to it every day, and move it to someplace where people can drive to already. Move it to the site that KPS owns. None of us knew anything about this miracle 13-acre site on the east side of the county. Like, none of us had ever heard of that before. So maybe in their vast real estate portfolio, KPS also owns other gems that could be turned into something. It's a short-sighted approach. I love to see Old Central being honored and being used. That is such a dramatic part of the Vine skyline. I love having that building in Vine. My goal is not to diminish what they're doing there. Again, could CAMSI move? And CAMSI students are already getting bused there, so there's no additional parking. And could you not build a state-of-the-art whatever CAMSI needs? I'll shout this from the mountaintops. It's very rarely a lack of funding. It's more frequently a lack of vision.
Well, thank you for that robust answer. I think it gives a lot, people in the community a lot to think about, and I know we've got a lot of people within listening range and in our audience who live in the Vine. And yeah, it does address too. I know a not insignificant amount of folks who have grown up, fell in love, wanted to plant roots in the Vine, but they definitely need the kind of resources you've been talking about here.
Yeah.
I think I want to kind of just close out by asking, for people who are also deeply concerned about the future of that building and the neighborhood, and are kind of opposed to the idea of just tearing everything down and putting blacktop over it.
Mhm.
How would they get involved in what is going on, in kind of getting
Yes.
their voice heard and supporting
Yeah.
that
Thank
effort to
you.
see something done with the site.
Thank you. Yes, as you said, this is a very nuanced problem. It's very layered. It speaks to sort of disinvestment. It speaks to abandonment. It speaks to people moving back into the cities that you and I know. You know, we knew 20 years ago that people wanted to live in the neighborhoods. This is a relatively new phenomenon for some of these decision makers. I think the area that you can have the most efficacy, the area that you can really have the most impact at this time is to you can go to the Kalamazoo Public Schools website. They have an email address. You can write them. If you're physically able to go to the meeting on Thursday, go there. I think again, my strongest desire is that we stay away from El Sol parent versus El Sol parent because that's not really the theater at all. Like we're not excited for El Sol parents. You know, some of the folks that spoke yesterday, it would be nice to see them credit the folks that had put in the hard work that 16 years ago allowed that building to open, rather than some of the attitude which was like, we love this toy that, or we love this tool that you made. We want it bigger and shinier, so we're going to move it over to another neighborhood. I think that the best way to do this is to just advocate for pumping the brakes. I think I hate to say it, but I think El Sol is gone. I think that ship has sailed. And I think the next best thing to do is to ask KPS as a steward, as an anchor institution, to really reconsider what that spot could be. And you know, there was some palatable, I don't want to say anger, but discomfort on Dr. Slade's part when he said, you know, you keep reiterating that this is going to be a parking lot. Like it's not going to be a parking lot. And one of the people from the gallery said, "Can you promise us that?" And he could not. And I think there's a real feeling right now like we need to apply a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, because again, like everyone who's on that school board is there because they love public schools. They want the best for the kids. So this is again, and I can't stress enough, Tiana Harrison has been a great person to talk to. The conversations that I've had with Tiana, I felt were were really good because I don't know all the information that the school board has had. So I think the best thing that we can do is inform them and encourage them just to pump the brakes on whatever happens at this site at Oak and Vine. If you need to cut ribbons, break ground. We love that kind of stuff in Kalamazoo. We're great at patting ourselves on the back. If that's what they need to do that, and then come back to the table in good faith and say, what can we really do to make sure that this is not an education desert, so that Vine residents are being served. You know, the median income in this neighborhood is $24,500. So this perception or this idea that these are all wealthy folks moving in here, that has to go away. Like that has to, like we need to look at as we have assets that other core neighborhoods don't have, but we also have a tremendous amount of people that are struggling and need resources allocated. You know, you mentioned, I would love to see nonprofits purchase some of these houses that are for sale and work with Bronson or work with the school system and work with whomever to get folks into these houses, because there's the single biggest issue prior to the closing of El Sol was the lack of affordable housing in Vine and how it was tearing apart the fabric. And that when we seeing our neighbors outside of work and or outside of home and in other capacities, the fabric of the neighborhood changes, and it really you don't tend to lean on each other as much as you might have when everybody was a little bit more familiar with each other. So again, I appreciate the opportunity. I know I've talked a lot about it. I do not have this all sussed out. I've had a week to sort of think about this and take the input from folks who have been working on it. Again, I think probably the best thing to do at this point is to write the Board of Education and express your thoughts and express your feelings on any manner of the subjects that this touched on, because it really does touch on a number of different systematic issues within the city of Kalamazoo. You know, and you can go to traffic, it can go to gun violence, it can go to representation, it can go to, non-democratic way in which the philanthropic community operates. There's all sorts of different avenues for folks to pursue. And my hope is too that, I think that as folks have been dispirited about things that have happened in the Republic lately, there's a sort of idea that at least on the local level, we have efficacy. It might be depressing on the national level, but at least in my own community, I still can have impact. And so I think this is an opportunity for folks to really flex and really see sort of where the rubber hits the road with that, and to hold some accountability to folks in a way that encourages a more respectful conversation. I there were components of yesterday's presentation that I found distasteful and disingenuous. That doesn't mean that I'm have personal animus towards some of the people who were in that room.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. And we will link to, again, this is an unfolding situation, so
Yes.
we'll kind of link to any I know the next school board meeting is this upcoming Thursday at
Yes.
7. Is that right?
Yes. I think so.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve, and have yourself a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. Thank you. For everybody else out there listening in Radio Land, I think this is about time for us to wrap up the show. So thank you all for listening. Until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.